Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Military Affairs Discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russia-Ukraine war has just entered a harsh and shocking new phase. While the world was still engrossed in following developments on the Eastern Front, a real earthquake occurred right in the Baltic Sea, which has long been considered the inviolable sanctuary of the Russian oil empire. In just under a week, Ukraine has carried out an unprecedented campaign to dismantle energy infrastructure. From direct strikes on the Kirishy oil refinery to leveling the piers at Kirishy and Ust-Luga. Ukrainian drones have traveled thousands of kilometers to create a deadly blood clot right in the heart of Russia's oil empire, turning hundreds of millions of dollars into ashes. A logistics system built over decades is being torn apart in just 7 days of fire, pushing the Kremlin into a financial catastrophe beyond repair. A 200-kilometer-long column of thick black smoke is swallowing up the pride of Moscow as strategic ports simultaneously turn into giant infernos. 18 oil tankers are left stranded with no way out as Russia's entire air defense system is completely paralyzed, exposing a terrifying fatal weakness that could end all resources sustaining the war. No longer just small-scale raids, Ukraine has officially dismantled Russia's entire war machine with long-range, devastating strikes unprecedented in history. Every hour, $450 million goes up in smoke, marking the collapse of a strategic corridor and the beginning of the end for an energy empire. Ladies and gentlemen, for decades, Russia has poured all its resources into strengthening its presence in the Baltic Sea. That is not just a strategy, but a matter of survival. This sea is an extremely vital lifeline, the main route that allows Russia's oil to continuously flow out to the world and sustain its economy. However, Ukraine has just delivered a decisive and cunning blow. Time and again, they have directly targeted and struck at Russia's oil and gas lifeline in the Baltic, destroying core assets that President Putin may never be able to restore. The past 3 terrifying nights have brought chaos that has engulfed Russia. The black heart of the Baltic region seems to have been squeezed, leaving Putin's oil empire in a state of painful hemorrhage. To understand the destructive power that Ukraine is unleashing in this area, let's take a look at the Kirishy oil refinery located in Leningrad province. In the early hours of March 26, Ukraine launched a devastating wave of drones at this facility, which plays a crucial role in turning crude oil into essential products like fuel and lubricants to keep the war machine and the economy running. The attack took place at a time when global oil prices were fluctuating and had repeatedly surpassed $100 per barrel since the United States launched the operation called Epic We in Iran. This strike, along with other consecutive raids, sends a strong geopolitical message to the Kremlin. Mr. Putin's intention to profit from rising oil prices will be uncompromisingly thwarted by Ukraine at every step. Robert Roddy, the notorious commander of the Media Buds unit, and now the head of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, announced on Telegram the achievements of what he called the airborne sanctions at Kirishy. With a sarcastic tone, he described how the Siberian oil, which used to flow politely into refineries and was quietly processed into oil for export through ports like Kirishy or Ust-Luga, has now been completely blocked. His surplus oil reserves, which had been stored for the past 3 days, have been severely damaged thanks to the support of Ukraine's freedom-loving drones with their spectacular fireworks displays. Roddy also sarcastically remarked that Ukraine has created a blood clot right in the veins of one of Russia's most important oil refineries. It will take many days just to extinguish the fires and find a way to clean up this horrific mess. But perhaps the reality is even more brutal than those sarcastic remarks. From the analysis of Euromaidan Press, the attack on the Baltic oil and gas network destroyed the primary oil processing units of the Kirishy plant. This is a fatal blow, because when these processing units are paralyzed, the entire crude oil refining process has to stop immediately. No one can produce gasoline or diesel fuel when the distillation towers are engulfed in flames. For Mr. Putin, this means that Russia loses the ability to produce oil products to supply troops at the front, as well as cutting off supplies to international customers to maintain the budget for the invasion. Not stopping there, Ukrainian drones also hit massive storage tanks, causing crude oil waiting to be processed and finished products ready for shipment to go up in flames. The true scale of the damage is still being assessed, but the silence of Leningrad officials who have not made their usual statements about downed drone debris, shows that they are too overwhelmed to deal with the fire spreading throughout the plant. This is exactly the tragic scenario that Mr. Putin never wanted to face in Kirishy, because this facility holds far greater strategic importance than Moscow has ever admitted. Kirishy is not just an ordinary oil refinery. While Ukraine has attacked many other refineries in recent months to limit Russia's profits, Kirishy is an irreplaceable link in the vast oil and gas machine that Russia has painstakingly built over decades. A report from Bloomberg confirms that Kirishy is designed with enormous capacity, processing more than 400,000 barrels of oil per day, focusing on strategic products such as diesel, gasoline, and light fuel oil for export. According to Aramid Press, the Kinep plant in Kirishy is among the 3 largest processing facilities in the entire Russian Federation, with a processing output of 20 to 21 million tons of crude oil per year. Contributing up to 6% of the country's total refining capacity, Kirishy is a vital fuel supply source for both the military and civilians. Ukraine has chosen the right weak spot to strike at the most sensitive moment. As oil prices soared due to global geopolitical turmoil, Mr. Putin placed his hopes on Kirishy to be the golden goose, bringing in billions of dollars. But now that hope is going up in smoke. What's worse for the Kremlin is that the tragedy in Kirishy is not unique. It's just part of a larger plan to completely dismantle Russia's oil and gas logistics system in the Baltic Sea. For 3 consecutive days from the early morning of March the 23 to March the 26, Ukrainian drone squadrons carried out unprecedented journeys, traveling over 1,000 kilometers to continuously strike strategic targets in the region. In addition to oil refineries, Ukraine also directly targeted export centers, ports, and any link that Russia relies on to get its oil onto global markets. Key seaports such as Plymouth and Ust-Luga became targets during these intense days of attacks. According to United 24 in 2025 alone, these 2 ports exported nearly 50 million tons of crude oil. That figure is proof of the enormous flow of money fueling the war machine, and now both are under threat. Key seaports like Plymouth and Thuy Mosque were the first targets to face the wrath. In the early morning of March 23, drones launched an attack on the seaport located near the city of Pitek. By 4 a.m., Governor Alexander Rudenko was forced to publicly admit the bitter truth that the fuel tanks had been damaged. However, that was just the tip of the iceberg. By March 26, international sources confirmed that up to 5 or 6 tanks in Plymouth had been completely destroyed, creating a thick black column of smoke stretching up to 200 kilometers deep into Russia. The sky, colored by the explosion, was proof that Ukraine's night hunters had found their target. And then just 2 days later, Ust-Luga suffered the same fate. Drones traveled over 1,000 kilometers and unleashed at least 10 massive explosions on Ust-Luga port, creating a huge glow in the sky that people from dozens of miles away could see, signaling a new, tragic chapter in this energy war. Governor Rudenko once again had to take on the responsibility of announcing reports about the attack, as he only dared to call this a small fire and did not forget to declare that Russian air defense forces had intercepted 56 Ukrainian drones. However, these reassurances were completely at odds with the harsh reality clearly visible in the satellite images. The Telegraph affirmed that the fire from the so-called small blaze actually raged fiercely, reaching over 100 meters high and turning an entire corner of the night sky red. By March 28, sources confirmed that Ukraine had struck Ust-Luga 4 times over the course of 5 consecutive nights. The vital oil unloading pier was completely destroyed, along with severe damage to the technical compartments and storage tanks, proving that this was neither an accidental nor a minor incident. Ukraine is carrying out a systematic campaign to destroy everything that Russia has painstakingly built for the oil industry in the Baltic region over many decades. The repeated occurrence of these attacks indicates an astonishing escalation of the war, leaving the Kremlin completely on the defensive. Carrying out 3 key attacks in just 3 days targeting the vital links of Russia's energy infrastructure is a testament to the combination of Ukraine's brilliant operational planning and the unbelievable weakness of Russia's air defense system. In Plymouth, 3 heavy strikes were also carried out in just 5 days. Energy expert Boris Ehrenstein stated that this is the most serious threat to Russia's oil exports since the war began. The careful calculation of scale, direction of attack, and timing created a terrifying ripple effect that, in more than 4 years of war, had rarely been seen before. Ukraine seems to want to replicate the achievement they accomplished at the port of Feodosia in Crimea in 2025. After the attacks at the end of last year, the Institute for the Study of War assessed that Russia may never be able to restore the operations of this port as long as the war continues. If Feodosia was a blow to the ability to control the Crimean Peninsula, then the attacks in the Baltic Sea this time are an even more direct threat to his resources for sustaining the war. In that context, when looking at the collapse of energy symbols, it is clear that there is a strategy to break the opponent's will from the root up. While the strategic ports are engulfed in smoke and fire, the refineries supplying them are also sharing the same fate of destruction. The seaports that Ukraine just attacked are responsible for transporting about 1 million barrels of oil per day to the international market. Currently, thanks to the price increase caused by the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, Russia is earning about $760 million per day from oil. However, experts predict that it will take Russia at least 2 weeks to repair the piers in the Baltic, based on previous precedents in Novozovsk. However, that 2-week time frame is only an assumption if Ukraine stops attacking. In reality, Kiev is fully capable of maintaining this pace, exposing the fact that the air defense systems in Kromov, Ust-Luga, or Kirishy are either paralyzed or simply do not exist. To understand the scale of this disaster, just look at the number of 18 oil tankers present at these two ports on March 22. This number accounts for nearly half of the total capacity of all Russian oil ports combined. The simultaneous shutdown of both Ust-Luga and Trimors is a cut too deep into the country's economic lifeline. When the ports in the Baltic Sea and Novozovsk in the Black Sea are paralyzed, Russia is left with only a few poor options in the Arctic or the Pacific, places that were not designed to handle the massive volume of oil from the Western Core region. Russian oil producers are scrambling to redirect their shipments, but it seems that every Russian route leads to a dead end. The loss of Ust-Luga and Trimors immediately wiped out about 40% of the country's total oil export capacity. Oil now either has to be transported thousands of miles to distant ports or stored in storage depots, where it becomes a quiet target for the next wave of drones. Although Novosovsk is trying to resume operations, the infrastructure capacity here cannot shoulder the responsibility left by the Baltic region. Moreover, transporting oil to the Black Sea at this time is no different than sending an invitation for Ukraine to continue firing. Russia is falling into a trap where oil circulates domestically without being exported, which means there is no revenue. If the figure is 40% or even 60% the proportion of exports lost through sea routes, Russia will have to face a budget gap of up to hundreds of millions of dollars each day. The Baltic Sea has always been Russia's lifeline, and Ukraine has been extremely smart in choosing this as the battlefield to dismantle the entire war machine of its opponent by targeting key ports and strategic harbors. With the pivotal strike on Kirishy, Ukraine's drones are no longer just circling around maritime targets. They have officially penetrated deep into Russia's interior, like blades slipping through the gaps in armor, taking down core facilities that are vital supply sources for export ports. This is a cunning and sophisticated multi-layered combat tactic. Ukraine is executing a perfect pincer movement, blocking the output at the seaports while simultaneously striking down the production plants behind them. Imagine a massive dam being destroyed at both the face and the water source upstream at the same time. Total collapse is now just a matter of time. Most likely, we will continue to witness more storms of fire raining down on Kyiv and industrial facilities in Western Russia, forming a ring of firepower that suffocates any hope of recovery for the Kremlin. The breakdown of infrastructure systems at Primorsk and Ust-Luga is not just physical damage, but the collapse of a supposedly impregnable defense strategy. Why has the Baltic Sea become the focal point of such a major geopolitical tragedy? Because for Moscow, this sea is not simply a steel vault full of oil money, but it is the soul and symbol of Russia's maritime power. As early as 1958, strategic reports from the U.S. Naval Institute affirmed a hard truth. Whoever controls the Baltic controls the lifeblood and economic heartbeat of Russia. From the height of the Cold War until today, this has not changed. In fact, it has become even harsher. The Baltic Sea is everything. It is the most efficient, shortest, and least costly transport corridor for Russia's black gold to find its way to the remaining markets on the world map. However, that only lifeline is being strangled by an invisible but ruthless vice. On one hand, NATO is continuously expanding, adding new members that surround this entire body of water, leading many analysts to bitterly call the Baltic NATO's backyard. On the other hand, Ukraine is launching airborne sanctions, a weapon that no legal barrier can stop. Since Western economic sanctions began to take effect, the Baltic Sea has become Russia's last lifeline. It was once considered the safest export route, out of reach of Ukraine's long-range weapons. While the ports on the Black Sea have been continuously eroded and depleted since the beginning of the war, the Baltic has been preserved by Russia as an inviolable sanctuary, a strictly protected strategic export corridor. But now that concept of safety has officially been erased from the Kremlin's dictionary. In just one fiery week of relentless attacks, Ukraine has sent a chilling warning. The sanctuary you once believed to be absolutely safe is now well within our sights. In fact, Kiev doesn't even need to bother hunting down the fleet ships that are wandering the seas to avoid sanctions. Because when the ports are nothing but ruins and the oil refineries are engulfed in flames, those ships have nowhere left to load cargo and no reason to exist anymore. This is a strategic game in which Ukraine is making the most brutal and pragmatic moves, striking directly at the roots instead of trimming the branches. Behind these terrifying explosions, it's not just a story about money or evaporating dollar figures. This is a sharp and powerful political message sent directly to Mr. Putin. That message says that Ukraine in 2026 has completely transformed. No longer the isolated and confused nation it was in 2022. After 4 years of being forged in fire and sacrifice, Ukraine has become a military powerhouse with astonishing long-range combat capabilities. The drones flying straight into Ust-Luga, Ramos, or Kirishy are the embodiment of a new generation of weapons, stronger, smarter, and more powerful. Ukraine's increasingly sophisticated deep strike campaigns with greater destructive power are exposing the obsolescence and weakness of the Russian air defense system once praised. The vital arteries that Russia spent decades, countless resources, sweat, and dedication to build are now being torn apart in less than a week. The energy empire that Putin painstakingly built to sustain the war machine is now crumbling under relentless attacks. And all these earth-shattering developments stem from a single name, Primorsk, which has been forced into a bind unlike anything in its history. So, what do you think Russia will do to save hundreds of millions of dollars in daily revenue when its vital artery is cut off?